Okay guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode I'm going to take a look at the 1998 movie Deep Impact, and it has a 45% rating on the tomato meter and a 43% audience score. It is considered by Rotten Tomatoes to be rotten. Personally, I don't think it is deserving of being rotten. It's not my favorite movie. I did not have that much fun with it. Yet, I feel that the main reason this film is considered rotten is because of another movie that came out in a competitive manner in 1998 by the name of Armageddon. Armageddon has a 73% audience score, although it's just as bad with the critics at a 38% tomato meter. I wouldn't consider doing a rotten review on Armageddon because I found it enjoyable, and certainly most everybody out there, they might claim it's ridiculous, but they also say it's enjoyable. They liked it. And so I think that's the biggest reason why Deep Impact is stuck at a 43% audience score, because Deep Impact is the non-fun version of Armageddon. It's the same premise, but done in a more overly sentimental, slow, and dramatic fashion. The science behind it, as far as NASA attempting to save the world, this is as equally bad scientifically as it is in Armageddon. It's as equally as ridiculous. The premise of sending astronauts to a comet to blow it up with nuclear weapons. But yet Armageddon gets the fun factor with a 73% audience score. Deep Impact, we're back to 43%. Now, not just the competition overshadowed it in the box office, but I also think that Deep Impact had some serious flaws. For example, it opens with a main character who has a serious daddy issue problem, and yet we never really get an understanding of why she has this problem with her dad, and it just drags on in a sentimental fashion. This character needlessly suicides herself along with her dad, and we feel something emotionally from this, but we never do get an answer as to why she has such an issue with her estranged dad, other than that she has some serious issue with him and with her mom to some degree. And I think that just makes this drag a lot, and we don't get anything from that sentimentality. It's kind of like a sentimentality that drags, but it doesn't give us a reward. Now, the rest of the movie, Deep Impact, is like, it ends on a hopeful note that humans aren't actually wiped out at the end, very similar to Armageddon, but we just have this overall sentimental drag down from it that results in this first character that we were introduced to being dead at the end of it, even though life goes on. And so, yes, there are other characters to root for. There are other characters that have their struggles during the film that never meet up with each other. It's almost like three separate stories going on. One regarding the astronauts with Robert Duvall going out to save the world from the comet. Another story about this character, this journalist character who has serious problems with her dad, who ends up dead, and another with Elijah Woods playing a teenage character whose family selected to go into an underground bunker of sorts. These three stories are playing out simultaneously. That's workable, but again, this drags down and it's not fun like Armageddon was. And so I think that's the biggest problem with this. Let's move into the actual audience reviews and see what they happen to say. We have some from September. The newest one is from September 2019, proving that this movie is still relevant today. Let's start in on the first one. 3 stars. Definitely a cool concept. Would be a good remake. It was just okay. If you like end of the world type movies and haven't seen it, it's worth a watch. Yeah, notice how they say it's just okay. They enjoyed it. They watched the whole thing, but they didn't have fun. They didn't get that fun thrill aspect to it, which is what Armageddon gave audiences in that same year. 3.5 stars. It's a good and memorable disaster movie. Again, they're saying that it's a disaster movie, but when you talk about Armageddon, you don't consider it a disaster movie. You consider it like an adventure, an action adventure, whereas this, you consider this a disaster movie because it has a positive ending and yet it makes you walk away feeling sad at the same time. That's kind of not, something that a fun, thrilling movie would want the audience to walk away with. 5 stars. Deep Impact is a serious movie about a serious threat. Armageddon takes that same threat and tries to make it funny in an overblown, over-budget, over-CGI'd way. Throw in its predictable ending, and it's just not that good of a movie. They're referring to Armageddon. Deep Impact approaches the situation in a more serious and more plausible way. That paired with a good ending makes it a good film. It will always be the better of the two. We'll see. They're saying that it's more plausible because it goes more into the sentimentality of the characters. Not that it's more plausible in the scientific way, it's not. This person just appreciates the drama. And, again, I thought the drama was like rather pointless because I never got the sense of why this character had such a problem with her dad. And the film spent so much footage telling me that she had a problem with him, but never explained what the problem was. Again, I just don't get it. 5 stars. Probably the best movie of all time, in my opinion. I would say maybe you're watching the wrong movie. You're referring to a different movie. 2 stars. I love science fiction of any kind, and even big-budgeted Leave Your Brains Homes movies are fun, but Deep Impact left me wanting more. Probably because the special effects extravaganza comes and goes so soon, or maybe the poor character development is poor, but I don't remember much of this film. Also, while the film teases us with some dramatically rich ideas, how would men and women react if they knew that the end of the world was imminent, it doesn't follow through. Yeah, I'll largely agree with this. It kind of gives us a taste of what might happen if people had one whole year to contemplate that they were all going to die, but only a taste. It doesn't really go into that. We just see the surface level of that and the government's reactions to that, but we don't actually get a real sense of that public reaction. It's very political and melodramatic, but not on the street level, realistic in that regard. 2.5 stars, uninspired melodrama. Yeah, it's very much like a melodrama, but a melodrama that doesn't reward you enough for going along with it to the end. 1.5 stars, too long, got bored long before the end. Yeah, I'll agree. It's very boring. A lot of it's wasted on that melodrama. 5 stars. Ignore the rating of the critics, I beg of you. Deep Impact holds in its grasp what is missing in so many disaster movies: realism and character. The disaster itself is far more grounded in science than perhaps any disaster movie, save for possibly Dante's Peak. And it dares to try and make us care more about the characters and what will happen to them and the world around them instead of just the carnage. Oh, you're just looking for carnage? Well, the disaster scene itself is one of the best on film. Well, I disagree with this 5-star review. Again, I'll say this is a 2-star movie. It doesn't deserve to be completely rotten, but it's rotten because it's boring and too much melodrama. But now this reviewer is saying that it's grounded in science more than any other one except Dante's Peak. Dante's Peak is rotten, and we can go into that on another episode. Science-wise, even rotten. Now, this movie being grounded in science, I'm not sure in what way. In the most superficial way, perhaps, because if you want to talk about NASA scientists going to use an atomic bomb to blow up a comet, just to get to the comet, it's just as bad as Armageddon getting to the asteroid. Let's just move on. 4 stars. Don't know why this movie has such a low Rotten Tomatoes score. I feel so much more real than other comet-hitting Earth movie. It had realistic charters that characters that I cared about, and the science at least made an attempt at being accurate. I'll say no. It pays lip service to astronomy, but so does Armageddon, just in a more played-up comical fashion. But neither one are accurate, scientifically accurate. No. 3.5 stars. Love this movie. It really tugs at the heartstrings and provides a decent disaster movie plot. No, it doesn't. For a disaster movie plot, maybe if you compare this to The Towering Inferno or the first airplane movie, the serious one, just called, I believe it was called Airport. then yeah, it's overly melodramatic, and the disaster part is just to get the melodrama to, make you feel something. But it doesn't, there's no payoff to it. You walk away from it. Again, you have a happy ending. Morgan Freeman out there as the president putting on a happy ending speech, but it doesn't feel like a happy ending. It feels just like you walk away deflated. 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed Deep Impact. It was a lot of fun. No, it wasn't fun. The cast all did a great job. The plot was a lot of fun, and the SFX was really good, especially for its time. There was a lot of your typical 90s disaster cliche moments, but that's all for the fun. No, if you were looking for fun, the same year provided you with Armageddon, Bruce Willis, uh, Ben Affleck. This was not fun. This was like melodrama. There was no fun to this. It wasn't meant to be fun. In no way, shape, or form was anybody involved trying to have fun. That's not the major fault of this movie, but don't say it was fun. That's just wrong. 5 stars. One of the best disaster movies in the past 20 years. Debatable. This is a review from 2017. Yes, if you want to compare it to 2012 or, San Andreas, the disaster movie by The Rock or Dwayne Johnson, then yeah, it's better than that. 2 stars, terrible and boring. Yeah, very easy to see how people would become bored. 3 stars, one of the many movies that made me cry when I was young. Sure, you can cry. There's a scene where the main character, played by Tiana Leone or Tia Leone, okay, she dies on the beach with her dad, and they die while embracing each other. Again, she has a daddy issue and is estranged from him, and she becomes reunited with him on the beach where they had their original childhood problems, and they're wiped out by the giant tidal wave. Yeah, it's sad, but again, there's no payoff because you never do find out what the big problem with their dad is. It's only just superficially shown to you over long stretches of footage. Yeah, you can cry, but again, what's the point of it? 3 stars, great CGI and a great cast, but lacked in storyline slightly. The ending was slightly anticlimactic, but a tearjerker at the same time. Recommended. Again, you walked away feeling like, you're deflated, so I don't get the point to it. There was no payoff. 3 stars, a feel-good movie that tells the story of humanity pulling together to overcome a threat to our very existence. Sort of in the mold of war games, but not as tight. There are lots of heroes with a capital H and lots of opportunities for heroic sacrifices, especially near the end. Decent special effects. Personally, I was irritated by the musical score, which was somber and ponderous and always intruding. Script pretty corny at times. It pays to see the movie at home on your DVD player so you can fast forward. Yeah, they're giving it 3 stars, but they're saying you need to make sure you have the ability to fast forward through stretches of this. That's not really a 3-star movie, is it? 4 stars, so much so underrated, but it sure had made an inspiration to many movies to come later. I don't know about that. Maybe it inspired people to do better, okay? 1.5 stars. If I were to say this film crashes and burns, I'd still be wittier than anything in the movie. 3.5 stars. Not as great as I did remember, but decent enough after seeing at the 5th time, I think. A pity the impact comes so late in the movie. Yeah, there is actually a payoff in the disaster regard where the comet or a piece of the comet hits the Earth, but it's not much of a payoff. You get 5 minutes of CGI disaster and a lot of melodrama leading up to it. 2 stars, even a somewhat saddening ending, not the typical happily ever after story, and a less by the book storyline could not save the wooden acting, specifically by the leads, poor dialogue, and generally unlikable characters. In all, it's better to spend your money on decent disaster movies, as this simply doesn't class as one. Verdict, C minus. And I've noticed something in these reviews already, or in 2016, by the way, on the reviews. Nobody has once actually mentioned the astronaut plot of this movie, or that they have a problem one way or the other with the astronauts sacrificing themselves to blow up the comet. I just find that interesting. That's a major part of the plot. It's one of the three main stories going on, and yet everybody's talking about everything else but that. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Obviously, something about the astronaut plot didn't work, even though Robert Duvall is the big actor put into that part of the movie, and yet nobody mentions that part. That's kind of weird. 2 stars. So this was one of the 2 meteorites are going to strike the Earth movies that came out in the summer of 1998. This was the one not directed by Michael Bay, and yet is still the weaker movie. The biggest problem above all, and there's a lot from bad acting to boring characters, is the plot. It's so generic that with a simple rewrite, this could have been any kind of disaster movie. I'll agree with that. From a giant volcano to a massive earthquake, hell, even Godzilla could have rose out of the sea and it wouldn't have been too far off. Yeah, this is just a typical, cliched, stereotypical, very melodramatic disaster movie, whereas Armageddon's not, and that's why it's fun. This is like harkens back to the 1970s disaster films, where if you watched it from today's perspective, you'd be very bored because it's almost all melodrama and very little actual disaster. 2.5 stars, meh, average disaster movie. 1 star, comet headed towards Earth in this unimaginative sci-fi disaster flick. Yeah, it is unimaginative. Even back in the 70s, there were some movies that did a better job scaring you about the thought of a comet hitting the Earth. I can't recall the titles of those, but there have been a few going back even into the 70s about this same exact premise. 2.5 stars, when the U.S. government tries to cover up an imminent comet strike that will end all human life, a reporter finds out the secret and forces the president to announce it. NASA sends astronauts into space to destroy the comet. Meanwhile, everyone on Earth must prepare for the worst. Deep Impact actually has good visual effects and is an intelligent film, but it doesn't have very interesting characters. They do at least bring up something here. The whole premise of the movie, the inciting incident that gets you into this, is that this journalist, MSNBC journalist, by the way, and I'm mentioning that because parts of this movie come across as an advertisement for MSNBC, as though they partly financed this. But anyway, the main character, played by Tia Leone, she's a journalist that finds out there's some kind of government conspiracy, which she thinks involves the president having an affair with somebody. She comes to find out that it involves the government covering up the approach of this comet. That's great. That actually works, except it just derails into other character stories and breaks the plot into 3 different stories going on simultaneously, and then derails her story into that of somebody who's got a serious problem with her dad that's unresolved. That's where it kind of fell apart for me, because it was going good until it devolved into 3 stories and brought in all these other characters and became overly melodramatic. If they had just stuck with Tia Leone's character and just made her the focus character throughout this, and not had the other stuff in there, not had Elijah Wood's story in there, this would have been far better. But this just devolved into adding more characters just to bring more melodrama into this thing. 0.5 star, just watched this film and was disappointed. Potential spoilers of an 18-year-old film ahead. The whole film is building to a double disaster, a small meteor that'll cause a tsunami, killing lots of people, followed by a massive meteor that'll kill everyone, apart from a select few who'll need to live underground for 2 years. So you wait the whole slow film for the disaster, and the first rock hits, and then out of the blue they figure a way to avert the second. So loads of people who accepted, yeah, he's about to say, loads of people were led by the government to believe that they were going to die, so they went ahead and suicided themselves pretty much. And then at the end, I think that's why the audience feels, even though there's a happy ending, they come away feeling deflated, because a lot of people pretty much died for nothing at the end. Yeah, it's not really a good positive note for something that's supposed to have a pretty much a textbook positive ending. 2.5 stars. First hour is pretty boring. Last hour is a lot better. No, maybe the last 20 minutes. Yeah, maybe the last 20 minutes. 2 stars. It seemed fundamentally unsure of itself on almost every front. 3 stars. Deep Impact is directed by Mimi Leder, and it lets Tia Leone in a science fiction disaster film about a comet that's coming towards Earth that'll destroy all of mankind, and so there are many attempts to destroy the comet. There was a time that disaster movies were everywhere during the 1990s, and in 1998 there were 2 disaster movies that had some similarities of the plot, this movie and Armageddon. In terms of scientific accuracy and movie quality-wise, Deep Impact is better than Armageddon. No, you've wasted a whole paragraph on what's sure to be like many paragraphs, I can tell. And you're making the point here in this paragraph that somehow this movie is more scientifically accurate than Armageddon. No, you're wrong. Yes, you have a more, possibly a more accurate portrayal of how characters would react on Earth and how the government might react. But there's no science in here that's better than Armageddon's. Please, you need to take another look if you want to make that argument. You're going to find there's no argument to be made. 4 stars. One of the 90s underrated gems, a bit bland but still likable and with a screenplay that demands audiences to pay attention. A film I rewatch from time to time with clear influences by Capra and Ford, even more so than Spielberg's. Yeah, as melodrama it works, but again, is as like some kind of summer action flick. It bombs horribly, and it's rotten in that regard. 5 stars, amazing, great, moving, maybe a little bit. 5 stars, no. Again, for such melodrama, we don't understand why the main character had a problem with her dad. What's the big deal? Why is it such a big deal? Why do we spend so much film footage on it? 1 star. Came to this movie late. Lacks everything you would watch it for at this late stage, big effects, action, and sci-fi status. Tries to be a drama, but none of the main characters are likable, so it's pretty flat and way too boring. Yeah, that's a good critique in that, yeah, actually none of the characters are very likable. They're not villains, but yeah, they're not really likable. 2 stars. Disaster is heading to Earth. 3 stars, an underrated disaster flick which focuses on characters and defocuses on the destruction porn. However, the CGI and the inconsistent tone might annoy some people. Yeah, it is inconsistent tone because you're splitting through 3 different actual stories going on at the same time, and each one demands a different type of theme to make it work. Yeah, it's inconsistent. 1 star. I now realize that I have been mistaken this movie with Armageddon, and that this was the boring one of the two. The movie has no pun intended, impact on the people who are watching and trying to enjoy the movie. This movie is incredibly boring, and it really takes a good part of the movie before anything really happens. The movie has too much structure and tries to tackle too much at the same time. Mimi Jeter is not a good film director, and this movie proves that. Well, you know, they do bring up the part that it takes too much time before anything really happens. You'll notice you notice that nobody really talks about Robert Duvall's role in this. We spend a lot of footage with him, for example, characterizing his relationship with his 2 Air Force pilot sons, and their friends at NASA and in the military, and they're at a family barbecue. And we spend a lot of time at that family barbecue with Robert Duvall's astronaut character, and it really doesn't go anywhere. There's no payoff to that. Yeah, a lot of wasted time. 2.5 stars. I do feel this is a more intelligent, meatier movie than Armageddon. It's a lot more low-key and emotional, playing on the drama aspect rather than action. Some parts of the film, however, are too low-key, which is a bit of a shame. I had more fun here, but it's not the greatest movie by any means. Yeah, it's very boring to a lot of people. 2.5 stars. Will Hollywood ever make a serious and intelligent blockbuster about the end of the world? Probably not, but this woefully inept attempt is even worse than Armageddon, stuffed with saccharine, career-worst performances, and a humorless script. It also flaunts some of the hokiest CGI and James Horner's awful score. Mimi Leder, hang your head in shame. Yeah, some of the CGI in particular, where the ocean's coming up against the Appalachian Mountains and Elijah Woods is on a motorcycle with his girlfriend escaping it in the nick of time, that CGI looks kind of stupid. Yeah. 1.5 stars. The science behind this movie is completely inaccurate. There's no heart to any acting, and the CGI is poopy. Well, at least they've got the part right about the science. There's no accurate science in this, particularly in comparison to Armageddon. They both fail in any science way. Okay, it's just more obvious in Armageddon. 4 stars. Disaster films tend to rely on the visual spectacle and that strange, possibly SimCity bred feeling of satisfaction that comes from watching the world as we know it be destroyed. Not so in 1998's Deep Impact, which serves up more of an emotionally charged character drama, while the impending doom spends 90% of the movie well impending. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. Again, that's why it's boring. 90% of it is just melodrama about the impending doom. And that's, deliberate because the movie starts out telling you that you're going to have a 1 year time period to think over, your impending doom. 3.5 stars. Not as good as Armageddon. Deep Impact brings tidal waves, meteors, and ELE. In this film, it's basically like Armageddon with Robert Duvall. I think 2 or 3 main characters died. And with the president more often, it does a good example of a late 90s or early 2000s. But I got a feeling it looks like an early 1990s and late 80s. Don't expect any huge destruction scenes. Mostly just 2 mega destruction scenes, which is still fine. So yeah, if you're just looking to see the world blow up, it's kind of disappointing because you only get a little bit of that at the end. 5 stars. Watching one of my fave films. Scary that in the film people over the age of 50 aren't entered into the survival lottery. Yeah, in the movie there's a lottery and you're automatically disqualified to go into the bunker if you're over 50, unless you're like a super smart scientist. It's kind of believable, but not really. The whole thing is on the premise that people are just going to become sad and behave themselves. That's not really what happens when something of this magnitude is hanging over their heads. They don't just like go home and watch Netflix and get sad and drink. No, 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 no. That's the one thing that wasn't realistic about this movie. There was no sense of panic or desperation. And that's really what the movie needed to be more realistic. 5 stars. So intense and realistic it almost killed me. I disagree. 3 stars. Deep Impact is an okay film. It is filled with interesting characters and subplots. However, the potential impact of the impending doom on society has been glazed over, which would have made for a far more interesting film. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. In this movie, when people find out that they've got a year to live, they just kind of go home and watch TV and they're just going to talk it out. That's not really how things operate here. 0.5 star. Boring. Did not care about anything that was going. Actors and actresses are lifeless overall. It's a film that you're going to give 5 minutes to, then start playing games on your phone or text or whatever to distract yourself because you will be bored out of your mind. I largely agree with that. A modern audience isn't going to sit through this thing. 4 stars. Scientifically stunning in attention to detail. I disagree. Emotional through line divided between many characters of a variety of backgrounds. Yeah, that's why it was boring. 4 stars. Moving and pretty realistic. One of the better disaster movies made, in my opinion. Only if you want to be bored. 5 stars. It's a really, really good movie. Somehow I doubt you've seen it. 3 stars. Saw it in the theater. Liked it, if I recall correctly. If you recall correctly. Okay. 4 stars. Loved Maximilian Schell in this. Yeah, he was there, but like he was there just to be there. He didn't really do a whole lot. I don't know. 3 stars. Not English. 2 stars. Boring, melodramatic, and lacking in thrills. And that's where I'm going to leave this. I find that accurate. Again, I don't say this is completely, totally rotten. I say it's rotten because it's automatically going to be compared to its competitor at the time, which was Armageddon. And this is just complete melodrama. It's very long and drawn out. And if you look at the actual artwork artwork on this poster here that you're looking at. This poster is kind of giving you the wrong idea about what this movie is about. This poster is saying a thriller with brains. It's showing you action, a big giant, streak of a meteor or comet hitting the ocean and promising you a Roland Emmerich disaster fiesta, but that's not what you get. You get like long slog of melodrama, and the melodrama is not even exactly explained. Again, why does the main character have such a problem with her dad? You invest us in it so much, and yet you never give us the payoff of finding out just what it is, why she had such a problem with him. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to come back hopefully with a lot more energy than this film had with my next Rotten review.